It all began at a lavish party, thrown by one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city. The air was filled with the soft hum of classical music, the clinking of glasses, and the scent of expensive perfume. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers, and everyone was dressed in their finest attire. It was the kind of event where the most important people in the city gathered, and no one could leave without making connections. Among the crowd, a young woman stood out. She wasn't one of the elite guests, but her presence was undeniable. Her style was understated yet elegant, and her smile lit up the room. Her name wasn't known to many in the high society circles, but she had a charm that made people take notice. She worked as a graphic designer, attending the event because of a client she had recently worked with. It wasn't a world she was used to, but she wasn't one to shy away from new experiences. As the evening went on, she found herself in a conversation with the businessman. He was the kind of man who exuded power just by standing still. Tall, with a commanding presence, he was known for his wealth and influence. His name was spoken in hushed tones, and his business deals were the stuff of legends. However, despite his success, there was something about him that seemed cold, distant even. He wasn't the kind of person you would expect to be approachable. But on that night, something about the way he looked at her made her feel at ease. Maybe it was the way he listened to her talk about her work. Or maybe it was the way he made her laugh with his dry humor. Whatever it was, she felt a connection, and it didn't take long for them to exchange numbers before the night ended. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew. They spent time together, talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. She was drawn to his confidence and ambition, and he admired her creativity and warmth. It seemed like a perfect match, two people from different worlds but somehow able to find common ground. But as time went on, things began to shift. What had started as casual dates turned into something more serious. The businessman started becoming more possessive, wanting to know where she was at all times. He had never been in a long-term relationship, and the idea of commitment was foreign to him. But with her, he felt something different, something he couldn't explain. He had been used to getting what he wanted with ease, whether it was in business or in his personal life. But with her, things felt complicated. She wasn't like the others he had been with, and he didn't know how to handle it. It was exciting, but also frustrating. She didn't fall into the mold of what he was used to. Still, he wanted her. Then, one day, she found out she was pregnant. The news hit her like a wave. She had never imagined herself in this situation, especially not with him. She had only just started to feel comfortable in their relationship, and now this? She wasn't sure what to do. The businessman, however, wasn't as shocked. He remained calm, almost too calm. He told her that it was a mistake, something that needed to be fixed, and that it was for the best. The conversation turned cold quickly. He insisted that she should terminate the pregnancy, saying that it would ruin both of their futures. He argued that the timing wasn't right, that his reputation and his life would be jeopardized. The words he spoke cut through her like a knife, but he didn't seem to care. She felt trapped. She wasn't sure what to do. She wanted to keep the baby, but the pressure from him was overwhelming. She felt like she was standing at a crossroads with no good choices ahead. Her heart was torn. She wanted to be a mother, but she didn't know if she was ready to do it alone. The thought of raising a child on her own, without any support from him, was terrifying. He promised her that they would go their separate ways afterward, that he would help her financially, and that it would all be over. But the more he talked, the more she realized that the man she had thought she knew wasn't the person he claimed to be. The kindness he had shown at the beginning of their relationship seemed to vanish, replaced by cold logic and self-interest. In the end, she felt she had no choice but to listen to him. The pressure was too much. The decision was made. She went through with the abortion. The experience left her heartbroken and feeling utterly alone. It wasn't just the pregnancy she was mourning. It was the person she had once believed he was, and the future she had imagined for herself. Afterward, she disappeared from his life. She returned to her small apartment, far from the world of luxury and wealth he lived in. She didn't want to be a part of it anymore. She couldn't. She spent the next few months in a fog of pain, trying to forget what had happened, but she couldn't. The memories of him lingered in the back of her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been nothing more than a passing moment to him. Life went on, but it was never the same. She threw herself into her work, kept busy and tried to move forward. But there was always a part of her that stayed behind, a part that couldn't forget the man who had promised her the world and then disappeared without a trace. And as the years passed, she carried the weight of that loss with her, never sharing it with anyone, always keeping the pain locked away. The businessman, on the other hand, continued with his life, unaware of the turmoil he had caused. He moved forward, buried in his work, his career, and his ever-expanding empire. His success seemed unshakable, and he became more entrenched in his world of wealth and power. He married someone else, had children, and lived the life that seemed to be his destiny. But what he didn't know was that his past was about to catch up with him in a way he could never have imagined. The life he had built, so carefully constructed, was about to face a challenge that would shake him to his core. The months after the painful decision were a blur for the young woman. The city felt different, colder somehow. The vibrant energy she once had seemed to drain away with each passing day. She threw herself into her work, hoping that focusing on her design projects would take her mind off the emotional storm she was going through. But no matter how hard she tried, the weight of what had happened kept pressing down on her heart. It wasn't just the decision to terminate the pregnancy that haunted her. It was the fact that she had allowed herself to believe in a man who, in the end, hadn't cared. She had spent months thinking about their future, imagining a life where they raised a family together. And yet all of those dreams were shattered in an instant. The businessman had been so cold, so calculating. He made the decision for her, convincing her it was the best option while all she wanted was to keep the child. But she had no one to turn to. The people in her life didn't know about the relationship she had with him, and certainly they didn't know about the pregnancy or the abortion. It wasn't something she could talk about, not with her friends and family who had always seen her as strong and independent. So she stayed silent, burying the pain deep inside. She avoided social events, no longer seeking out the circles that once made her feel alive. She became a shadow of the person she had been. The work she once found fulfilling now felt like a distraction, something to keep her busy and distracted from the memories that never seemed to fade. She moved to a quieter part of the city, renting a small apartment in a less glamorous neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a fresh start, away from the glittering world she had briefly been a part of. The apartment was modest, with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was comfortable. It was a place where she could process everything in peace, or at least try to. But the months turned into years. She continued working as a graphic designer, slowly building a reputation for herself. She met new people, but none of them ever came close to the connection she had felt with the businessman. No one could replace the dream she had once had, the dream of a life together, of building a future with someone she thought she could trust. She moved on, or so she told herself. She kept busy, made new friends, and started to enjoy the simple pleasures of life again. Yet every now and then, the memories would creep up on her, those moments of joy when she thought they had a future, followed by the crushing realization that it had all been a lie. Despite the pain, she began to find herself again, though she would never be the same person she was before. She became stronger, more independent. She focused on building her own career, her own life, and although the scars of the past remained, they didn't define her. Meanwhile, the businessman's life continued its upward trajectory. He was still at the top of his game, his businesses expanding rapidly, his wealth increasing with every passing year. His marriage, although not the passionate love story he had once hoped for, was steady. He had children now, a family that kept him grounded in a way. But despite everything, there was a hollow space within him that he couldn't explain. He often found himself thinking about the woman he had pushed away so long ago. He couldn't quite pinpoint what it was about her that had lingered in his mind. She wasn't like the others he had dated. She wasn't obsessed with status or wealth. She was real, genuine, and had a warmth that seemed to draw him in. But that wasn't the reason he thought about her. He thought about her because for the first time in his life, he had felt something real. And he had crushed it, abandoned it, thrown it all away. He tried to push these thoughts aside, telling himself that he had done what was best, that he had acted rationally. But deep down he knew that what he had done had hurt her in ways he would never truly understand. The years went by, but he never once reached out to her. He had no idea what had become of her after that night. He had assumed she would move on, just like everyone else he had ever known. In his world, everything could be fixed with money or power, and emotions were just distractions. He had convinced himself that he had made the right choice by cutting ties with her. But in the back of his mind, the question lingered. What if there had been another way? What if he had stayed and faced the consequences of his actions? What if he had been a better man? These questions gnawed at him, especially when he saw his children growing up happy and secure. Every time he looked at them, he thought about the child he had never known, the child he would never know. The thought of it made him uneasy, but it was something he couldn't change now. As the years passed, he found himself more entrenched in his work. There were always new business deals to make, new opportunities to chase. But even in the midst of all the success, there was a part of him that felt empty, a part that couldn't be filled by money or status. Then, one day, a knock on his office door broke the rhythm of his busy day. He looked up from his desk, expecting to see one of his assistants. But instead, standing in the doorway was a man, someone he had never seen before, but whose presence seemed to command attention. The man was well-dressed, his posture confident, but there was something about him that felt different. He wasn't here to sell him anything or to ask for a favor. There was a certain quiet intensity in his eyes, and the businessman couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice betraying just a hint of curiosity. The man nodded, stepping inside. "I believe we have some unfinished business," he said, his voice calm but firm. The businessman raised an eyebrow, unsure of what this man meant. But before he could speak, the man continued. "I'm here to talk about my mother," he said. The words hit the businessman like a punch to the gut. He froze, his heart suddenly racing. He didn't need the man to explain further. He already knew who he was talking about. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The businessman's mind raced, trying to process what was happening, and then it hit him, the realization that the past he had buried so deeply was coming back to confront him. The man standing before him wasn't just some stranger. He was the son of the woman he had abandoned all those years ago. The businessman stared at the man standing before him, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was racing, but it felt like time had slowed down. The man's words echoed in his ears. "I'm here to talk about my mother." The businessman didn't need him to say anything more. He knew exactly who this man was, even though he had never seen him before. This was the son of the woman he had walked away from all those years ago, the woman he had hurt in a way he could never take back. The man in front of him was the result of a past the businessman had tried so hard to forget. The thought of it was like a cold shock to his system. He felt a mix of guilt, confusion, and fear. What was this man doing here? Why now? The man stood tall, confident, but there was an undeniable intensity in his eyes, a fire that burned with a purpose the businessman could feel in his bones. The moment stretched on, and the businessman struggled to find the right words. But before he could speak, the man continued. "I don't think you understand," he said. "My mother, she's been living with the pain of what happened between you two for years. She had to carry that burden alone, and I'm here to get answers. She never told me much about you, but I grew up with the weight of your absence, and now I need to know why. Why did you leave her? Why did you abandon us?" The businessman's chest tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had never prepared for something like this. Over the years, he had convinced himself that everything was fine, that the past was behind him. But standing here now, facing this man, this son who was somehow the physical manifestation of all the mistakes he had made, it felt impossible to ignore the truth. The man didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice growing stronger, more determined. "You probably don't even remember her, do you?" he said. "You probably don't remember how she cried when you told her you wouldn't be a part of our lives. I was just a baby then, but she never stopped thinking about you. And I can't even begin to imagine the pain she must have felt, knowing that you had the power to change everything, but you chose not to." The businessman's throat felt tight, and his hands were clammy. He had always prided himself on being in control, on making decisions with confidence and certainty. But now, standing face to face with the consequences of his past actions, he felt completely powerless. "I never meant to hurt her," he finally managed to say, his voice low. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I thought it was the best thing for both of us. For her, for me, for the life I had worked so hard to build. I thought it would all go away. But it didn't. The man was silent for a moment, taking in the businessman's words. The businessman's heart raced, and for the first time in years he felt vulnerable. He had spent so much of his life building walls around himself, thinking that wealth and power would protect him from the things that really mattered. But standing here now, facing the son of the woman he had abandoned, he realized that no amount of money could shield him from this moment. "I don't expect you to understand," the businessman continued. "I know I made a mistake. I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't ready for the responsibility. I was selfish. And I hurt her. I hurt both of you." The man listened, but his expression didn't soften. He had heard these words before, from others who had tried to justify their actions, who had tried to make excuses for the hurt they caused. But it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to take away the years of pain his mother had suffered in silence. "You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to be okay," the man said, his voice sharp. "You can't erase what you did with a few words. My mother spent years trying to move on, but she never did. And now you're here after all this time, acting like you can just fix everything with an apology. Well, it doesn't work like that." The businessman swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew the man was right. Nothing could change the past. Nothing could undo the hurt he had caused. He had been a coward, a man too focused on his own life to see the consequences of his actions. And now, standing in front of the son of the woman he had abandoned, he felt the full weight of his choices. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the businessman said, his voice quieter now. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't ignore this anymore. I can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't pretend I didn't make a choice that changed all of our lives." The man was silent for a long moment. The tension in the room was thick, and the businessman could feel his heart racing, his mind spinning. He didn't know what the man wanted from him, or what he expected. But one thing was clear. This conversation wasn't just about the past. It was about something much bigger, something that neither of them had been prepared for. "You don't owe me anything," the man said finally, his voice softer than before. "But you owe my mother the truth. You owe her the chance to hear you say the things you've never said. And I'm not going to let you walk away from this without doing that. Not this time." The businessman felt a surge of emotion rise up in him. Regret, guilt, and a strange sense of hope, all mixed together. He didn't know how to make things right. He didn't know if it was even possible. But one thing was certain: he couldn't walk away again. He couldn't let this man stand here confronting him with the truth, and then pretend like nothing had happened. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done," the businessman said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try. I don't know where to start, but I'll do whatever it takes." The man nodded, his eyes still hard, but there was a flicker of something else there too, something that resembled a glimmer of hope. "That's a start," he said quietly. "That's all we need. A start." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The room was filled with an uneasy silence, but the businessman knew that something had changed. This wasn't just a conversation about the past. It was a chance to rebuild, to finally face the consequences of his actions and try to make things right. And maybe, just maybe, it was a chance for redemption, but the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was too much pain, too much history between them. The businessman had a long way to go before he could ever hope to make amends. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had something worth fighting for. And as he looked into the eyes of the man before him, he realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The businessman sat back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. The conversation had turned everything upside down. He had always believed that his success in the business world was the ultimate proof of his worth, that his wealth and influence would shield him from the messier parts of life. But now, sitting in his office across from the son of the woman he had once known, he realized how wrong he had been. He had spent so many years building a life that was comfortable, insulated from the consequences of his actions. But in this moment, none of that mattered. The son had come to him with raw honesty, demanding the truth and justice that the businessman had long buried. For the first time in years, the businessman didn't know what to do. He wasn't sure how to fix the past or even if it could be fixed. There was so much pain, so many mistakes, and so much regret. He had spent years convincing himself that the choices he made were for the best. But now, sitting in front of this man who had lived a life shaped by his decisions, he understood just how wrong he had been. The man's words still echoed in his mind. "You owe my mother the truth." They were simple words, but they hit him harder than anything he had ever heard in his life. It wasn't just about apologizing anymore. It wasn't about giving a speech and moving on. It was about facing the consequences of his actions, about truly understanding the pain he had caused. He had tried to forget, to pretend it never happened. But life had a way of forcing the truth into the light, no matter how hard you tried to ignore it. And now the businessman was confronted with a reality he could no longer escape. His mind drifted back to the past, the time when he had made the decision that would change everything. He had been so focused on his career, on his ambition, that he hadn't even stopped to think about what he was doing to the woman who had once been a part of his life. She had been kind, patient, and loving, offering him something real, something genuine, and yet he had turned away from it. Why? He had been afraid of how it would change his life, afraid of losing control. But what he hadn't realized was that by turning his back on her, he had lost something much more valuable than anything his wealth could ever buy. The businessman rubbed his temples, trying to push the thoughts aside, but they wouldn't go away. The man who stood before him now wasn't just a reminder of his past mistakes. He was a living, breathing person, a person who had grown up in a world without a father, a person who had suffered because of the choices the businessman had made. And now he was demanding answers. He looked at the man who was still standing tall, waiting for a response. The businessman could see the anger, the frustration, but also the underlying sadness in his eyes. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a cry for justice, for recognition of the pain that had been ignored for so long. "I never meant for things to turn out like this," the businessman finally said, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "I was selfish. I was scared. I thought that I could just walk away, that it wouldn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than I ever realized." The man didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking at him. There was no judgment in his expression, just the quiet understanding that sometimes words weren't enough. The businessman wasn't sure if this was the right time to ask for forgiveness or if forgiveness was even something he deserved. He had caused too much hurt, and now with the truth finally out in the open, he had to face the consequences. "I don't know if I can ever make it right," the businessman continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if there's anything I can do to fix what I've done, but I'm willing to try. I owe it to you and I owe it to your mother." The man's gaze softened slightly, though the tension in the room remained. He had heard words like these before, promises of change, promises of redemption, but he wasn't sure if he could trust them. After all, words were easy. Actions were the real test. "I don't want your money," the man said suddenly, his voice steady. "I don't need anything from you except for you to be honest. I need you to be real with me, to tell me why you did what you did, and I need to hear it from you, not just as an apology, but as an explanation." The businessman nodded slowly, his mind searching for the right words. He had never been good with emotions, never good at opening up. But now, faced with this man who had come into his life demanding the truth, he had no choice but to confront the reality of his own actions. He took a deep breath. "I wasn't ready," he said. "I wasn't ready to face the responsibility. I thought I could just walk away, that it wouldn't affect me. But it did. It affected everything. I've spent so many years building this life, and I thought I could just ignore everything else. But I couldn't." He paused, looking down at his hands as if trying to find the courage to continue. "I thought that if I kept my distance, I could protect myself from the consequences. But what I didn't realize was that by doing that, I was hurting everyone around me, including you and your mother. I should have been there. I should have done more. And I failed you both." The man's expression softened again, but he still didn't speak. The businessman continued, the words coming more easily now. "I was afraid. I was afraid of what it would mean for my career, for my life. I thought I could just move on, but that was the coward's way out. I should have been there for her, for you. I should have taken responsibility." The silence in the room grew heavy, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The businessman sat in the chair, feeling the weight of everything he had said. It was the truth, but it didn't feel like enough. The damage had already been done, and no amount of apologies could change the past. Finally, the man spoke. "I don't know what you expect from me," he said. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not even sure I can. But I wanted to hear you say it. I wanted to hear you admit that you were wrong, that you hurt her, that you made a choice that changed everything for us." The businessman nodded, feeling a sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. He had said the words, but it was clear that there was still so much more to be done. Redemption wasn't something that could be achieved in a single conversation. It would take time to rebuild trust, time to make amends, and perhaps time to find forgiveness, though that was something he wasn't sure he would ever earn. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words feeling like a weight on his tongue. "I'm sorry for everything." The man gave a small nod. "I believe you," he said quietly. "But sorry isn't enough. You need to show her. You need to show both of us that you're really willing to make things right." The businessman sat back, looking at the man across from him. He didn't know how long it would take, or how things would unfold from here. But one thing was clear: he wasn't going to run away anymore. He had to face the consequences, and he had to try to make up for the life he had neglected. The businessman sat alone in his office long after the man had left. The conversation replayed in his mind, each word echoing in the silence of the room. He had made promises, admitted his faults, and faced the harsh truth of his past. But as the minutes stretched into hours, he couldn't shake the feeling that those words were not enough. He had done the right thing by being honest, but it still didn't feel like enough. What more could he do? He had been living in a bubble for so long, insulated from the real consequences of his choices. Now, after all these years, the truth had finally come crashing down. He could no longer hide behind his wealth or his success. He couldn't buy forgiveness or erase the past with his money. This was something far bigger than anything he had ever dealt with before. The thought of the woman, the mother of the man who had confronted him, weighed heavily on his mind. She had been brave and strong. Despite the pain, despite everything he had put her through, she had continued on with her life. She had raised her son, built a life without him, and had probably moved on in ways that he would never understand. But that didn't erase what he had done. She had suffered, and for that he could never forgive himself. The businessman spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. He reached out to a few people from his past, people who knew the woman he had once been with, hoping for any clues as to where she was now. He needed to find her, not for himself, but for her. He knew that he had to try at the very least to make things right. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to show her that he was truly sorry. He wasn't expecting her to forgive him, but he had to try. He couldn't let the story end with more silence and regret. Days turned into weeks, and the businessman found himself searching every corner of his mind, digging through the past like a man looking for a missing piece of his own soul. He spent hours in meetings, on phone calls, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. The woman who had once trusted him, loved him, and had been left with nothing. The woman whose life he had shattered with one callous decision. Finally, one day he received a call from an old acquaintance. It was a woman who had been close to her back in the day. She had heard about the businessman's search and had agreed to help him. She told him that the woman had moved away years ago, far from the city where they had once lived. She had made a life for herself, built a career, and raised her child without him. The businessman's heart sank as he heard the details. It wasn't just that she had moved away. It was that she had done so to escape him, to escape the memory of what he had done. She had taken the painful step of starting fresh, trying to forget everything, including him. The woman on the phone had told him that she didn't know exactly where she was now, but she had mentioned that she was living in a small town. The businessman thanked her, hanging up the phone with a sense of emptiness. He knew that it would be difficult to find her, but something in him refused to give up. He had to try. Weeks passed, and the businessman continued his search, traveling to small towns, asking around, trying to find the woman who had once been a part of his life. His determination grew stronger each day. He had no idea what he would do when he finally found her. But he knew that he couldn't just let the years slip by without taking action. One afternoon, as he sat in a small cafe in yet another town, nursing a cup of coffee, he received a call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost familiar. "I think I might know who you're looking for." The businessman's heart raced. It was the woman's voice, but it had changed over the years. It had softened, but there was still a steeliness in it that he remembered. He listened carefully as she explained that she had heard about his search and knew what he was trying to do. But she wasn't ready to meet him. She wasn't sure she could face him after all this time. I'm not angry anymore, she said quietly. But I'm also not ready to open that door again. It's been so long and my life is different now. I'm different now. The businessman understood. Of course he understood. How could she be ready to forgive him after everything that had happened? How could she welcome him back into her life after all the years of silence, the years of pain? I'm not asking for anything, he said, his voice soft but sincere. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I can't change what I did, but I wanted you to know that I regret it every single day. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He held his breath, waiting for her response, but when she spoke, her words were calm, measured. You can't change the past, she said, and neither can I, but I'm glad you're sorry. I think that's all we can do now, acknowledge the mistakes and try to move forward. She paused and then added, I've spent a long time letting go. I think it's time for you to do the same. And with that, she ended the call. The businessman sat there for a long time, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She had moved on, and now it was his turn to do the same. He realized that he couldn't keep looking back. He couldn't keep hoping for a chance to rewrite the past. The mistakes were there, they always would be, but they didn't have to define him. Over the next few months, the businessman took the time to reflect on his life. He started to focus less on his business empire and more on the people who mattered. He spent more time with his family, tried to repair relationships he had neglected, and slowly began to build a sense of peace within himself. The man who had confronted him still stayed in touch. They spoke occasionally, and the businessman made an effort to keep his promises to him. Though they would never be close, there was a mutual respect that grew between them. The businessman knew that he could never make up for the years lost, but he could do better from here on out. The journey to redemption wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But with each day, the businessman felt the burden of his past lighten, knowing that at least he had taken the first step toward making things right. And as for the woman, the one who had been the catalyst for all of this change, she remained a part of his past, a part of his heart. He couldn't undo the years of hurt he had caused her, but he could honor her strength by learning to live with honesty and integrity from now on. Sometimes, the only thing you can do is move forward, one step at a time.